Hey everybody, it's Tuesday.
And welcome to this week's edition of Hook, Line, and Striker.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And thanks for being here with us tonight. So we do have our comments and questions section up. So, if along the way you guys have things to add, make sure to put that in the comments and we'll bring that up and talk about that as well. Otherwise, we always give people a few minutes to tune on in, and we usually talk about our fishing weekend. We took last Friday and we did a little bit of fishing then because we had actually some weekend obligations. So as many people have things going on this summer and, people get busy, that's what happens. And so we had to plan our most recent trip around our availability. And what happened is we went out and honestly fishing was terrible. I was going to try to find a good word. It just is what it is. And that is what happens. We've had some really great fishing all year long, but we had some really crazy storms go through last week. The rain does a lot, but then that much wind does a lot. And then, I guess all the boats going through in summer does a lot. And so I think it was kind of a perfect combination of where did the fish go? And this past weekend, I guess I don't know.
Well, and be honest, we were a little split on where to look for fish. And so when you have two opinions in the boat, it kind of leads you running right down the middle. And sometimes the fish are on either side of that track. So,
that's just honest.
Just how it goes. We threw a lot at them and it just didn't work out. But there's been other people still fishing deep structure around us, within an hour, 2 hour drive. So fishing deep structure, there's still people pulling fish out of 2-3 feet of water up in the Lando area. So, just go out there, play your cards and see what happens.
Well, and with that, I'm interested in where you're at and how your fishing is going. So let us know what you're fishing for and how it's going and what you're using, because this next weekend we're going camping this weekend, so I'm going to try shore fishing. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
But with that being said, the other thing that I feel like I have to mention this, with the show, Tuesday of this week. So, if you are listening on YouTube later on, then that won't matter. But what does matter is that this week, Striker has begun to kind of premiere on their Facebook page all of the new gear that's coming for the winter. And that is really exciting. Monday, there was a kind of group picture of some men's gear and some women's gear because there is gear coming out for everybody. But along with that, I think today, Tuesday, there was a post that came out even about the new Apex suit.
Yeah.
So that is something to really be excited about. We've hinted a little bit about that here. I know you can check the website. Otherwise, more details to come with winter.
Yes, ma'am.
So I guess with all of that, let us know again if you have questions or comments about, your favorite Striker products or even in the things we talk about along the way. But let's bring in our guest. So it's Tyler. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Sounds like you guys have had a busy weekend. A little bit of different opinions in a boat, and I think we've all probably been down that road before.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything bad. It just, when the fish stop biting and, you can't check everywhere at one time and it just kind of makes the boat run in a straight pattern instead of squiggly lines. So.
Well, and as I think many people can relate to, we went to a body of water that we thought we knew super, super well. And so to get there and to not get those bites right away can actually really throw you for a loop. So in that case, I think that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, for sure.
But Tyler, for being on the show, for people who may or may not know you, can you tell us about yourself?
So, grew up in south central North Dakota. I've lived in the Dakotas my entire life. Ice fish, boat fish. I'm in sales for my day-to-day job, so I bounce around, fish big water, small water, sloughs, travel, do destination trips, a little bit of everything. Predominantly fish walleyes, but some panfish, mostly panfish in the winter, not really so much in the summer, but like to like to look for bigger fish, but also like to go out and have fun and take new people out of the boat with me and just take people that don't necessarily get to go fishing that often. So
that's really cool. I always like to hear from people who fish for different fish in open water and ice season, because, you know, sometimes people use each to each other's advantage, and I bet you still do that. But it is really funny to it's like two different sports then.
it is, yeah. The pan fishing can be in the winter can be really run and gun, and walleye fishing out in our lakes can be pretty sedentary. You know, we might set a lot of dead rods on structure lines and sit there for a long time, where panfish are out in sloughs or basins just moving around as fast as you can. So, and then sometimes I go up to Lake Winnipeg and chase walleyes, and you never stop moving. So
that's actually perfect timing for a question that we got here from Shane. So what is your go-to rod for Lake Winnipeg?
So my go-to rod for Lake Winnipeg, probably for maybe the last 4 to 5 years, has been a 40-inch JT Outdoor Products Black Rain. I fish outside. I stand a lot. You're always moving, and I like that 40-inch rod. And the parabolic curve of that rod has really helped. It's a nice rod for up there. I run mono a lot because you're fishing outside and it's cold and windy, and there's constantly snow blowing across the water or across the ice, and you're freezing lines. So the mono is nice. It's easier to clean. Recoil guides on the rod, they don't ice up as bad, and if they do, you can clean them off. So honestly, that's pretty much the only rod I run. I do have a couple 38-inch rods when I'm sitting down, but mostly it's a 40-inch rod program, and I like to run around and move around. And
well, and remind us the name of that rod, because this is one that we hear about all the time.
Yep, so it's the Black Rain. There's a summer version and a winter version of it. Comes in 32, 34, 38, and 40-inch in the ice version, and then 6.9 and 7.3 for the summer version. And it's a big, it's a big walleye pike rod, trophy specific rod type of deal. So, but it is very sensitive. I mean, some days Lake Winnipeg, you might run a number 7 rip and wrap, and some days they might go on a 16th ounce or 8th ounce flutter spool. So the sensitivity of that rod really is awesome too.
And then we have Andy in the comments that's agreeing. He put up a bunch of money signs, so I imagine he's saying that he likes that rod, not that they cost that much, because they are really, really fabulous rods, so they are super worth it. But then as far as your ice setup goes, what is it that you're putting on the end of that line?
So it varies anywhere from like a number 6 or 7 rip and wrap all the way down to, you might run a rattle spoon or just a plain hammered flutter spoon. Sometimes blade baits, but a lot of times I prefer to fish with 2 rods. I'll drill 2 holes. I'll fish 1 rod in each hand and run a rip and wrap on 1 rod, or a jackal, and then a flutter spoon on the other rod. And some days they want the rip and wrap, and it might be 15 minutes, and they might want a flutter spoon with a salted minnow or even a live minnow. So.
Okay, so that's exactly what I was going to ask. Sometimes people use those baits, those setups, just exactly as they are. And sometimes people are tipping them with all kinds of things, maybe waxies, maybe minnow heads, maybe whole minnow. So how do you go about deciding?
Really, it's basically you feel out what the fish want that day. I mean, Winnipeg fish are basin fish. They're super aggressive. Most of the time, they're going to come for one or the other. Sometimes they don't. There's times where we've had to run like a rip and wrap to bring them in because it's super stained up, muddy water. A lot of times in 20 inches ice, you can't see the bottom of the ice. It's so stained up. And then we might set a dead stick 3, 4, 5 feet away. Like I like running the snare rod too, because you don't have to grab the rod right away. And they come for a minnow then some days, but most of the time they're going to tell you what they want if you're running 2 rods. And another big key to Winnipeg success is having a good group of guys that you can work with, or gals too. Moving through baits rapidly. I mean, one day they might want blue chrome, and the next day they might want a black bait. So.
Well, and I love what you're talking about as far as covering water, because for some people that is a huge key to catching fish. So if you are out there, you have the ability to have people with, spread out. But then the other thing that you mentioned along with that is having the snare rod. So what that is the system that allows you to detect that bite. And even, you don't have to stand right up next to it because you can see that from, a couple feet, a little bit away, whatever you want to be able to run to, but to be able to grab that rod, set something up over there, jig over here allows you and maybe your friends to cover a whole lot of water at once.
Yeah, and really that is the key, is friends and some of the right equipment and just hard work up there some days really pays the difference. I mean, you line up 20, 30, 40 yards apart and just drill in a general direction until you run into them. And when one guy finds the right bait, you let everybody know, and it can be a really good day.
Yeah. Oh man, I don't have any fishing spots around me that are big enough to have that many friends come fishing with me.
Yeah, some of my best trips up there, we've had 15, 20 guys and gals that work together, and you just go drill a grid out and keep going and move and give it 5-10 minutes. If you're not marking fish, move on.
And then Jeff is asking, what are you running for electronics then?
So I run a variation of electronics. I still like the old school Vexilar. It's fast. When the fish are aggressive, I run that just because you can move from hole to hole really fast. If they start to get finicky or if we're in a smaller group, I do run a live scope. If you're sitting still, the live scope is nice. You can look, see what direction they're coming from. Usually we're all running a combination of the two. I mean, if guys have, that way, if they have the ways to carry enough equipment, we'll run a live scope and a Vexilar usually. Sometimes guys just run a Vexilar. And there's guys that fish without electronic, and they'll just fish 3-4 feet off the bottom and hope for the best. But me personally, I like my FL 28s or 18s and run a live scope too. So
with that, the electronics help you find your fish once you're in kind of the general area that you think that they're going to be. How do you go about finding where you're going to start off for the day?
Some days it's just a matter of kind of going out, and like Lake Winnipeg's got a huge, there's usually huge groups out there. And for us, it works just to get outside the group, maybe a quarter, half a mile, and try to find our own pot of fish and then just drill. And sometimes you might drill for 2 or 3 hours and it takes you 2-3 hours to run into a good group of fish. But the biggest key to success up there in finding fish has been having a good group that likes to drill holes and keep moving. When it's cold and windy, it gets really tough some days. You either get lucky or you don't.
Not to jump ahead, because I always, ask these kind of questions at the end, but I feel like it fits right in here. When you are the kind of person who is out on the ice, it is freezing temperatures because the lake is frozen, middle of winter, but you are drilling that many holes for that long. How do you successfully balance out what you're wearing and the temperature that you are?
I usually start with a good base layer and then a good hoodie, and usually from there I put on just a good set of bibs, and I have a jacket that I go take on and off all day depending on what the weather's doing. Last year we were up there, actually a year and a half ago, pre-COVID, we were up there for like 4 days. The wind never stopped blowing. I think I wore my climate jacket probably for 4 days straight. Had the liner in probably 3 of the 4 days. Really for me, it's all about a layering system. I pretty much run the stealth glove all year long. Probably 8 months out of the year I run a stealth glove. That's kind of been my go-to. I do have warm hands, so that's a big help. I like the neoprene glove.
So then you were talking about the climate jacket. Is the climate bibs that you run as well then?
I do, yep. And then, I just vent out, hip vent, use the hip vents and try to regulate temperature that way. Because when you are running around, you do get hot really fast.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, and to have the ability to choose to have the liners in or to take them out, that is, a huge advantage going into the day. Or, if it gets unexpectedly warm, that's always nice to be able to pop out.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, no matter what you choose to wear, there is tons of zippers all over, the jacket and the bibs to help you regulate that no matter what you're up to.
Yeah, definitely. And layering and venting is a big key for that, to staying comfortable. And you might have a 30, 40, 50 degree temperature swing up there with wind chills. It's pretty common. They call it big windy for a reason. The wind blows and it's wide open.
Yeah, that's crazy. I think our wind gets chilly here, and I bet we have nothing on you guys. That's funny. So the other thing that you had mentioned is that you like panfish in winter, and we spent this whole time talking about bluegills about walleye so far. So what is your panfish setup like?
It varies a lot. I run a lot of snare rods. Usually we're just covering ground, and a lot of our perch lakes get high pressure in the winter. So it can be a really fickle bite. Some days you might, and we can run 4 rods in North Dakota. So you probably run 1 jig rod and vary that from a tungsten all the way to like a small, rip and wrap, and 3 snare rods tipped with minnows and waxies. And some days you go to all snare rods, and then the next day they might hit a rip and bait, or they might hit a small tungsten. But that, I do run a lot of snare rods. They're big key for us. We've got just a lot of ground to cover, and the bite can be real fickle some days. So.
Well, and to be able to have a 4 rod setup, that's really awesome to be able to set out 3 across the ice, because that's something, again, you can cover a lot of space with that. And especially when you're talking about panfish, if they have any kind of movement in the winter, to have those snare rods set up, sometimes you can even see the movement patterns and where those bites are detected along the way. So that's really cool for kind of starting to understand the fish.
It is. And another big thing with the snare rod, especially for us out here, the wind is always blowing, whether it's 8, 10 miles an hour or 15, you get all that snow blowing across the ground. Tip ups are frozen. You can have a snare rod with just the line hanging in the ice, or even running a hot box if it's really cold and they're not frozen. You can catch fish when a lot of guys are sitting at home or they're struggling because their equipment's frozen in place.
And then you said the term hot box. So what does that mean?
So it's a stainless steel box that actually, it folds down, and it's got a heating element in it. It runs on a 1-pound propane cylinder, has a high, medium, low setting, and keeps your hole unfrozen. So it's another product from JT. It really serves a purpose on certain days. Some days you just have to set the box up. You might run the hot box for, the heating element for an hour or 2, but works really well.
Yeah, because when you're talking about that high wind, to be able to just block out some of that snow that's blowing around, and the wind itself, because man, sometimes the other thing that people don't realize, we're talking about the hole freezing up and all of that, but even the amount of action that sometimes it forces on the rod, to have any kind of little block out there, that sometimes really does help you.
Yep, and you can run it with a snare rod or with a dead stick and a tip up flag, or even a rattle reel too. Some guys prefer to run it with a rattle reel, and it really has its own way of fishing.
And I've actually even seen on days where it's not super, super cold, some people will just even throw like a hand warmer in there. But I think even just like the metal reflective, like will kind of catch the sun on those days that aren't so bad. So that's pretty interesting. We have quite a few people here in the comments that are talking about they love the hot boxes. Awesome tool for covering water when it's cold. And I think he means the snare rods as well. Jeff put a link for the hot boxes. So Jeff, that's awesome. Thank you for doing that. And Todd is asking, what pound line do you use? I assume, are we talking jigging? Are we talking in the hot boxes? It sounds like maybe Todd.
I actually don't know Todd, but it's kind of a loaded question whether he's talking about Lake Winnipeg or panfish, and I mean it varies a lot. So.
Okay, I agree. So Todd, if you are still listening, let us know a little bit more of the details of what you were asking about. But I guess otherwise, ice season, do you tend to stay local or take some big trips?
It It all varies. I do fish locally some, but I do like to do destinations. I'm a sales rep. I live a super busy life, so I like doing destination trips because for me, it's a vacation. I get away, I reset, and I like to see new places. Like the picture you guys grabbed off my Facebook page, that was from Henry's Lake out in Idaho, Montana border. Last year I was on Cascade. I was supposed to go to Fort Peck last year. That got canceled because we didn't have ice. They got ice late, but it was real sketchy. I really have become, I like to fish destinations and go to Winnipeg a lot because it gets away, I get away. And I was up at Caribou Lodge Outfitters 2 winters ago. We fished cranberry in Lake Athabasca up on the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border. So I would say the majority of my fishing in the winter is destination stuff. I'm super busy in the winter with work, but I do like doing destinations. And I probably fish in the winter, 50% of my time is destinations and 50% is around home. But
I actually got a little bit more information back from Todd. So what pound line do you use? And then he said both, and he said hot boxes. So let's start with the hot boxes. How do you go about setting that up?
So a lot of days, and I almost always run a snare rod. Sometimes I do run a dead stick. Like when we were up on Athapap, I run a snare rod, or I run a black rain with a dead stick, and that was 20-pound X9. We were fishing big fish up there. But like at home when I'm pan fishing, 3-4 pound mono, sometimes, that's kind of where I end up with. Lake Winnipeg, probably 12-pound XT is where 90% of my rods are at. I've got some super lines on a couple rods just because when it is nice out, you can horse fish around a lot easier with super line. And when it's not, when it's not windy and it's not blowing or sunny out, you can fish a lot harder and faster that way. But I probably have too much gear for the amount of fishing I do, but it's nice to have stuff. I mean, there's days where I've been on the lake and somebody's like, shoot, I broke a rod or my reel isn't working right, or I'm short a rod. And it's like, well, here, borrow something. And with being with JT, I mean, we sell rods too as pro staffers. So a lot of times you borrow a rod to somebody, you might never get it back. I mean, I've had guys pay me like, here's cash. I want your reel, line. I'll take everything you got. Like some days they've taken down to the custom painted ripping wrap on the end of the line. It's just, fishermen are impulse buyers. And when you're fishing and you're catching something on a good piece of equipment, if you have it, they'll take it.
Well, and you're talking about custom painted rip and wrap, that's something that everyone gets excited about, because one of the things that we talk about all the time on the show is sometimes that you just give fish something that they don't see all the time, and that might be what works. So people are seeing how they use bait, if they're around with you, and then they take to their favorite home lake, and I imagine it'll work there just the same.
Well, and
yeah,
that's a good point too. Something that fish haven't seen before, going kind of back to the line thing. So Tyler is matching a lot of lines to where he's fishing. And one thing that we do that's very odd for pan fishermen is we don't use a whole reel full of light line. We honestly use a 8-pound Sunline X Plasma. And then we run a super small swivel from Hatena, and it's a number 28. So it's meant for fly fishing. So you're able to cast it with a fly rod. So it's super small. And then we can adjust our leader lengths to the clarity of the water. We can adjust our leader lengths to the what pound test we want to use. And the thing that it does for us, because we panfish almost exclusively, is that it totally takes out the line twist. Almost, I would say probably about 90%. Like we don't have to unspool any of our reels at the end of the season because our line is all bunched up, and it keeps the bait really good in the water for the whole season too.
Yeah, leaders are something that a lot of people don't realize. Like fishing Lake Winnipeg, I never run a leader. If I'm running a braided line, it's a lot of times it's straight to the bait. I've fished up there in the fall in the boat, and you go straight to the bait. Now we were on Fort Peck beginning of July, and I was running a 15-foot leader. mean, it was the very water clarity is totally different when you get out here. It varies so much. I mean, you got stained up water versus super clear water, and yeah.
That's a really interesting point. When you go up to Winnipeg, that you don't even use a leader at all. You just got to kind of chuckle at that, because how often does that work? Just when I go out to the Wolf River, otherwise, that gets pretty chocolate milky some days. But that's a really interesting thing. Lose a few less baits when it's tied directly on, I imagine.
You do, yeah. Or if you don't pay attention to what's going on with your line, you might lose one really quick and not expect it, or lose a fish of a lifetime. I mean, I know guys that you're running that line across the edge of the ice 6, 8, 10, 12 times an hour, every couple hours if it's biting good, and you don't watch, and pretty soon you've got a tore line and there's a fish swimming away with a bait in its mouth. So it really is a totally different lake than a lot of people are used to ever fishing.
Yeah, that is for sure. We were talking about all kinds of the gear that you had. And so jumping back a little bit, you were talking about your stealth gloves that you love. And I'm almost a little bit interested to hear that you love, because the stealth gloves, they're waterproof. That's why people tend to like them. But you're using like the hot boxes and stuff. So, I mean, you're not having as much line freeze. And I mean, I guess I didn't realize that those would go together.
I like the stealth glove. I run a tiller boat. I run a 2090 Warrior and fish a lot in the spring, a lot late in the fall. Really, there's always a pair in my boat, and there's always a pair in whatever, if I'm on my 4-wheeler side by side fishing, I've always got a pair. Last week I wore them. We were on Lake of the Woods. It was cold one morning, and I had my gloves on last week. I mean, it's a tool that I never put away. They've really, I like them. I mean, I might, in the winter, I probably carry a couple around because they're going to get wet and iced up. But there's always a pair in the boat. And surprisingly, I've got some really good friends that don't ice fish at all. And they're the best glove. Like they're really nice. I mean, you can feel, you can jig with them. You can do whatever you need to do with them. Yeah.
And you can tell that he loves them as well. So that's pretty funny. We do have, you're talking about the boat, but jumping back to all the gear that you had on ice, Shane is asking snowmobile or side by side?
Side by sides are nice for old guys like Shane, but snowmobiles and 4-wheelers, and I know Shane's. Yeah, snowmobiles and 4-wheelers I've grown to like, because you can get around a lot faster. But the side-by-side's nice for carrying a lot of gear, carrying a buddy with you, carrying a couple of friends. I've kind of run them both. I've run I run a side-by-side for a lot of years. Started on a 4-wheeler, started walking, then on a 4-wheeler. Then I spent a lot of years in a Ranger with a topper on it. And then 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to downsize and get back to more mobility and moving around. So worked with Profab Outdoors, and we designed an aluminum box that goes on the back of the 4-wheeler, and really kind of designed it around one person running and gunning, and rod storage on hold rod cases right on top of the box. And I've really become to like that. I run it on a 4-wheeler for a couple of years, and this year it'll probably be on a snowmobile.
Is this Profab Outdoors? Did we run into them at the Sioux Falls Ice Expo one year? Is that possible?
That was actually 2 years ago. Yeah, we were down there with that box for the first time. We'd been there with the toppers a couple of years, and then we were down there.
Those are really, really cool. And I'm almost going to ask you to describe it a little bit more, because they're a little bit bigger than what I would have gotten the impression of.
Yep. So they're I don't know the dimensions off the top of my head, but basically in mine, it holds a live scope, 2 Vexilars. I got a bucket in there. I've got an Engel cooler, and then I've got 4 3700 Plano boxes. And the doors flip down, and they're actually like a shelf to use to lay stuff out on. And then on top, I run 2 of the Lakewood rod cases, so I can run 6 rods in the case is really nice. In one case, really nice. And then in the other case, actually is where I put my hot boxes. So I've got all the gear you can really need for a day of fishing right at my disposal.
And I know that Lakewood has a case out this year that might fit all of those in one. So you might be like up a whole rod case this year.
They do have a new case out. I haven't looked at it. I like their old cases. I mean, the old cases are tried and true, but I'll be curious to see what the new cases are like. And
it's funny called cases because it's not like the brand new, whatever you already have. But that's the thing, is they hold up so well, you almost forget to look at the new stuff because you almost don't even need it, which is so funny. But I heard you say that, so I had to bring that up. That's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
We have Jeff here talking about, he was interested in hearing the talk about snowmobile and side-by-side because he got a 6-wheel Argo. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure what that is, but he says that it floats. He put his truck in Winnebago 2 years ago, and that is really, really just terrible because we hear that story a lot. And safety is the number one thing that we're after, and the ability to come back, fish the next time the way that you went out in the first place. So, we're here talking about all this gear, but all the striker suits float. I think, do the stealth gloves float? Like, not your hands, but if you dropped them on the water, I wonder that. That would be kind of a funny thing, but.
That'll be the next thing we need. We need a summertime suit that floats. That would be, then you wouldn't have to mess around with a life jacket so much on some of these lakes. But
like a floating bathing suit?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. There's some great rain gear out these days, though, and that does not necessarily float. But I heard that you are a fan of the rain gear.
I am. I've had the Evolve set pants and jacket since basically the day they come out. I've been running them. I run a tiller boat and I fish cold, warm weather. I like the Evolve suit, really works well. I wore 2.5 days last week. I never took it off. It was cold, windy. I like to be comfortable, so I like good gear, and it's really worked out well. I layer with some layers underneath of it in the, late spring, early summer, and couldn't even venture to guess how many days I've spent in my suit. So I think it might be time to upgrade for next year, or replace it. But
that's another story.
I went with the gray, just cooler, and if you're out in the summer when it's kind of marginal up and down temperatures, my philosophy is that color stays cooler. So it's probably something that needs to be cleaned a little more, just because the color of it. I mean, you kneel down, do whatever, but it really only ever comes out of my boat to get washed and put back in my boat. I think maybe one time in the last 3 years I've got to the water and not had it in my boat.
Yeah. I actually have that same suit, but in the black. I love it as well. And I do know that it also comes with a tag on it that says to wash it often. So maybe your white suit, maybe that's like kind of a blessing in disguise, because I think honestly, like the washing, the keeping up with that helps that fabric with that, with that super rainproof ability, because it does feel so much like fabric. They are comfortable suits, but they are also super, super breathable. And so, I kind of chuckle when you are talking about, in spring and stuff, you might want to layer under it, because some people will be like, oh, I'll pack my rain gear because it keeps me warm. And no, I will tell you in this case, it is advertised as breathable. Do not pack your rain gear as your warmest layer, because it is super windproof. Keeping that wind off of you, that has a big effect, but at the same time, just being chilly, you are going to want those warm layers underneath in those cold seasons.
Yeah, March and April, October, November, I keep my climate suits with me if I go to the lake or the river in those months, I've got both suits with me, and some days I wear my climate suit in the boat. I mean, that is one thing though that you do need to realize, that it breathes, and when the wind blows, it's going to breathe through. So
Yeah, and that's interesting because some days you feel like you should have like your winter bibs in the morning and then switch to your ice season in the middle, but then you have to go back. I think actually that might be one of the nice nods to the new suit that's just kind of coming out recently. So kind of can't wait to hear about that because it's supposed to be like super flexible and warm, but like more
Yep.
more waterproof than the traditional just snow gear. Is that what we were told? So that's a cool thing.
Yeah, and then I'll change it up too, and I might run my climate liner underneath my Evolve suit. And the two suits really give me flexibility 12 months out of the year. So,
hey, that's actually a cool idea. I like that. No one's ever said that. I'm going to try that actually. Oh my gosh. And then I guess for your season this year, what else do you have coming up?
Fall fishing. I mean, really, I just got back from the Warrior Owners shootout on Lake of the Woods and got some busy stuff coming up with work and some hunting stuff. So it's going to kind of be a little slow here for the next probably month. Not a lot of fishing, but then fall fishing really gets going in October, late September when we start to cool off. We get really hot. We've been over 100 degrees multiple days. I think in July we set a record, like 19 or 20 days over 100. So it'll be fun when the water cools back off and our water's going down a lot. Like Skakawia's dropped a long ways, Oahe's down a long ways. Devil's Lake is slowly going down, but it's going to be a lot different here. There's new structure in play. There's structure that we used to fish in the fall that's completely out of the water. You can't even get to it. You couldn't even cast a jig to some of this structure. I mean, it's so far out of the water. They're talking Skakawea is going to go down 5 or 6 more feet yet before it frees up. It's dry out west. I mean, all the way really from central Minnesota west, the whole United States is dry. So I think it'll be a really interesting year. Fish are going to be a lot more concentrated. So fall fishing should be a lot of fun. That
is actually a really good point because that's something that not a lot of anglers have to deal with, to be honest. So, I hate to call it a drastic situation, but especially when the water is dropping by so many feet at once, that really can throw off a lot of people's fishing plans. So, one thing to remember though is as these water levels just keep going down, try to take note of what is all of a sudden becoming, unsubmerged, because sometimes like structure pops up that you didn't realize is there. And, God forbid that water comes back up. You're going to want to remember those things.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I was on Skakawea here like a month ago with a buddy that I usually spring fish with, and we occasionally fish in the summer together. And we're like, hey, look at that one spot where we used to catch a lot of fish. And it was almost like a perfect stair step from like, I would say when the water was high from like 6 to 12 feet, it was a perfect stair step. And we always caught a lot of fish there. There was big boulders and a gravel transition, and you didn't know it was a gravel spot. And you can drive around on these low years and really find some new spots or new areas to fish.
Well, and that's an interesting point that you're bringing up, because once in your mind what that looked like on your graph in the past, and you can compare it to what it is in real life that you can see, that puts you in a really, really great position to be able to, put some trust in your electronics and go and find where those fish are relating to. If you know that they liked whatever specific situation that is, you can find that then hopefully somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some of that stuff if you get certain structure on a point, basically structure spot on a spot stuff, it looks way different on a graph than you'll ever realize looking at it with your two eyes.
Yeah, that is for sure. And then for fall fishing, what's the first thing you're going to target? Are you looking for panfish or walleye or something else?
Pretty much 100% walleye. Yeah, the panfish, I don't really target panfish at all in the summer. Occasionally go do a little bobber fishing on Devil's Lake where we look for some panfish here and there, but most of the time in the fall it's 100% walleyes. I like catching walleyes in cool water. I guess, yeah. I like throwing jigs and throwing rip and wraps, and I like that shallow, when they're up feeding.
And then when you throw jigs, are you more of a plastics or a live bait?
I've slowly transitioned to more and more plastics. just some areas it's just a pain in the butt to get bait. I mean, we're desolate out here, but really whatever they're biting on, if I go to a lake for the first time in a while, there's probably going to be bait in the boat. You know, we don't have a lot of bait options out here. We're pretty much fathead minnows is all we're buying uptown. And if you're good at catching them or locating them, you're maybe going to find some creek chubs. But for the most part, we're fatheads or plastics.
That's awesome.
And then ripping wraps too in the fall, definitely. So
that's awesome.
But that's probably my favorite way to catch fall walleyes is casting ripping wraps.
That's cool. We have Todd here asking about the electronics that you use in winter. And Todd, actually, that's such a great question that we already talked about that. So if you are joining us near the end of this talk, then thank you for doing so. But also feel free to scroll back and listen to what we already talked about. If anybody does have any further questions, always come and put those in the comments because we certainly can always come back and, type things in or, send it to Tyler if you have a specific question or whatever that is. But Tyler, for people who want to continue to follow your adventures and all the fishing that you're doing, in this fall and winter, how do they do that?
Pretty much the easiest way to follow me is on Facebook, Tyler Noot, Noot, and I'm on Instagram, but I'm very inactive. So pretty much follow me on Facebook that's pretty much the best way, or find me on the water. If you're out in the Dakotas, try to find me on the water.
That is something that I know that I will do for sure. Might be tricky, but I guess if you run into us, come say hi to us too, because that's always kind of a fun thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we do love running into you guys. So thanks for taking your time and thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a great time. Tyler, thank you for being here as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and everybody that asked questions. If you think of anything more, feel free to message me at any time. So.
Cool. So to those of you at home, have a great week. Good luck this week fishing and join us next week on Hook, Line, and Striker.
Night, everybody.